Hello, everyone. Today, I want to share an incredible story with you. How learning English helped me achieve my dreams, follow my passion, and find success. If you have big dreams, whether you want to be a doctor, an engineer, a lawyer, a businessman, or anything great, then English is a must. There's no doubt about it. English is spoken by 1.5 billion people around the world. It is the language of travel, business, and the internet. If you don't speak English, you might miss out on big opportunities. Imagine getting a better job, making friends from different countries, or enjoying movies and books in their original language. But don't worry, it's never too late to start learning. You can begin today and become part of this global community. If I can learn English and reach my dream, then you can too. My name is Sophia, and I am from Brazil. I was born in a small town. My family was neither rich nor poor. We were middle class. We had enough to live comfortably, but we couldn't afford luxuries. My parents worked very hard. My father was a taxi driver, and my mother was a school teacher. They always told me, education is the key to success. Since I was a little girl, I had only one dream, to become a doctor. I still remember the moment that changed my life forever. I was 10 years old. My little brother was very sick. He had a high fever, and we were terrified. My parents were crying, not knowing what to do. Then a doctor walked in. He was calm, confident, and kind. He smiled at us and said, "Don't worry, I will take care of your son." I watched him closely. He checked my brother, gave him medicine, and spoke with so much knowledge and reassurance. After a few hours, my brother's fever was gone. He was safe. At that moment, I knew one day I would become a doctor and save lives. But as I grew older, I realized something important. If I wanted to become a doctor, I needed English. Every single medical book is in English. All medical research is in English. Even in my own country, doctors needed English to study, to communicate, and to work in hospitals. But there was one big problem. My English was terrible. I went to a public school where we barely learned any English. I knew only the basics. Simple words like hello and how are you? But whenever I saw a full English sentence, I felt lost. It was as if the words were dancing on the page, refusing to make sense. I still remember the day my English teacher asked me, "Sophia, can you read this sentence?" I looked down at the book. The letters blurred together. My heart started racing. I couldn't read it. I couldn't understand it. I wanted to disappear. I don't know, miss, I whispered. The class burst into laughter. My face burned with shame. That day, I went home, sat alone in my room, and thought to myself, how will I ever become a doctor if I can't even read a simple English sentence? I felt completely hopeless. But then, something happened that changed everything. One evening, my father came home from work, exhausted. He sat next to me and noticed my sadness. "Sophia, what's wrong? You've been so quiet these days." I looked at him, my eyes filled with tears. "Papa, I want to become a doctor, but my English is so bad. Without English, I can't study medicine." For a long moment, my father said nothing. Then, He took a deep breath and spoke words that would change my life forever. If English is stopping you, then learn English. Go to a place where everyone speaks English. I was shocked. But Papa, we don't have the money for that. He smiled gently. We don't have much, but we have enough. Your dreams are important. That night, my parents and I sat down together and discussed where I could go to learn English. After a lot of research, we chose Canada. Why Canada? First, because everyone speaks English there. I would have no choice but to practice English every single day. Second, because Canada has an excellent education system with some of the best schools for learning English. Third, because it is a multicultural country with friendly, welcoming people. As an international student, I wouldn't feel alone. And fourth, because compared to other countries like the USA or the UK, studying in Canada was more affordable. It was still expensive, but at least it was possible. It was not an easy decision. We were a middle-class family. My parents had some savings, but not much. Still, they made a huge sacrifice. They used almost everything they had to pay for my flight, my English school, and my first few months of living in Canada. The night before I left, my mother held my hands tightly and looked into my eyes. Sophia, we are giving you everything we have. Promise me you will not give up. I took a deep breath and whispered, I promise. Tears filled my eyes as I hugged my mother tightly. I promise, Mama, I whispered. And then, with just one suitcase, a little money, and a big dream, I flew to Canada. The moment I landed in Toronto, I felt like an alien in a new world. Everything was different. The weather was freezing. Back in Brazil, it was always warm. But here, my hands felt like ice. The food was unfamiliar. I missed my mother's homemade rice and beans. The people were kind, but they spoke so fast that their words blended together like one long, confusing sound. And then came the biggest problem, English. At the airport, a man walked up to me and said, Hey, do you need a taxi? I panicked. My heart started beating fast. I didn't understand what he said. I just smiled nervously and nodded. Where to? He asked. My brain stopped working. I had no idea what he was saying. The words made no sense. I stood there, frozen, feeling completely lost. Finally, I grabbed my phone and showed him the address. He nodded and took my suitcase. That night, in my small rented room, I sat on the bed and cried. What am I doing here? I can't understand anything. How will I survive? For the first time in my life, I felt completely alone. The next morning, I went to my English language school. The teacher greeted us with a warm smile. Welcome, everyone. Let's introduce ourselves. When my turn came, I stood up. My hands were shaking. My heart was racing. My name, Sophia. From Brazil, I managed to say. I wanted to say more. I wanted to tell them about my dream, about my journey. But my mind went blank. My words were stuck in my throat. The teacher smiled encouragingly, but I heard some students giggling. My face burned with embarrassment. I quickly sat down, feeling small and humiliated. That night, I made a decision. No matter how hard it is, no matter how many mistakes I make, I will learn English. I made a plan. I promised myself that I would do everything possible to become fluent, and that was the beginning of my English learning journey. I still remember my first few weeks in Canada. It felt like stepping into a completely new world, exciting, but also terrifying. In Brazil, I understood everything. Here, I felt like a baby, learning how to speak all over again. Before I tell you how I improved my English, let me share some of the strangest things I noticed in Canada. First, no school uniforms. In Brazil, students wore uniforms, but in Canada, kids could wear anything they wanted. Some even came to school in pajamas, and nobody cared. Second, people don't touch much. In my country, we hug, kiss on the cheek, and stand close when we talk. But in Canada, people like their personal space. If you hug someone without asking, they feel uncomfortable. It was a whole new world for me, and I had so much to learn. But I was ready. The weather in Canada changed in seconds. 1 minute, the sun was shining, and the next, it was raining, or even snowing. It felt like nature couldn't make up its mind. And then there were the supermarkets. I walked into a store, ready to pay, but there was no cashier. Instead, people scanned their own groceries and paid by themselves. What? In Brazil, we always had someone at the counter. This felt so strange. Another thing that surprised me, people said sorry for everything. Even if you accidentally stepped on their foot, they would say, "Oh, sorry." I found that so funny. In my country, if you step on someone's foot, you say sorry, not the other way around. And the food. The portions were huge. One day, I went to a restaurant and ordered a small meal. When the waiter brought my plate, I was shocked. It looked like enough food for 3 people. But the biggest shock of all? The way people spoke English. They spoke so fast. And they used slang I had never heard before. In school, I learned proper English, like, "Would you like to have a coffee?" But in real life, people said things like, "Want to grab a coffee? Do you want to get a coffee?" "I'm down for that." "I agree." That's so lit. That's amazing. It felt like I had never studied English in my life. The second day in my English class, I was nervous. The teacher gave us a simple writing task. I felt excited. I can do this, I thought. I wrote carefully, checking my grammar. But when the teacher returned my paper, it was full of red marks. She looked at me kindly and said, "Sophia, your writing is good, but your sentence structure needs work. You're thinking in Portuguese and translating to English. That's why it sounds unnatural." I felt frustrated. But speaking was even worse. The teacher asked me a question. I knew the answer in my head. I knew exactly what I wanted to say. But when I opened my mouth, nothing came out. I felt like crying. Will I ever speak English fluently? But I refused to stay weak in English. I knew that if I didn't improve, my dream of becoming a doctor would die. So I made a plan. I called it the headphone trick. One of my biggest problems was speaking. I was too shy. I was afraid of making mistakes. So I found a solution. I put on headphones and walked around the city, pretending I was on a phone call. But the truth? I was actually talking to myself in English. I described everything around me. The sky is so blue today. That car is moving really fast. I love the smell of coffee from that cafe. I didn't care if people thought I was crazy. I was practicing English, and that was all that mattered. Got it? Here's the revised version without numbering. I walked down the street, looking around and describing everything in my head. The sky is blue. That woman is wearing a red coat. Now I am entering a cafe. I will order a coffee. I spoke softly to myself, pretending to be on a phone call. This simple trick helped me think in English and practice without fear. Every day, I had one goal: to learn 3 new words and use them in a sentence. 3 words a day didn't seem like much, but little by little, those words added up, and my vocabulary grew. At first, I watched movies in English with subtitles. I thought I was learning, but then I realized something. I wasn't actually listening. I was just reading. So I made a decision. No more subtitles. At first, it was frustrating. I could only catch a few words and I felt lost. But slowly, my ears adjusted. I started recognizing common phrases, and suddenly, English didn't sound like a blur of noise anymore. It started making sense. Then came the real test. One day, I walked into a coffee shop and told myself, "Today, I will talk to someone in English, no matter what." I stood in line, my heart pounding. It was my turn. The barista smiled and said, "Hey, what can I get you today?" I took a deep breath. "I would like a cappuccino, please." My voice was shaky, but I said it. She nodded and asked, "Do you want it with almond milk or regular milk?" I understood her. Without thinking, I answered, "Regular milk, please." She handed me the cup and said, "Here you go. Have a great day." I smiled and replied, "You too." It was a tiny conversation, just a few words. But in that moment, I felt like I had won a gold medal. That day, I learned something important. English is not about being perfect. It's about being confident. Learning English was one challenge. Surviving in Canada was another. Life in Canada was expensive. Every month I had to be careful with my money. Rent for my small room was $800. I lived with a roommate to save money. Groceries cost $250, so I learned to cook at home instead of eating out. Transportation was $120, and I used a monthly bus pass. My phone bill was $50, and I kept my plans simple. English classes were $500 per month. To pay for everything, I worked part-time in a small cafe. My days were long and exhausting. I woke up at 6 a.m., went to school, worked in the cafe, came home tired, and still studied English at night. I missed my family. I missed home. Some nights, I wanted to cry. But every time I felt like giving up, I thought about my parents and their sacrifice. They had given me everything so I could have this chance. I could not fail. The biggest turning point came when I finally stopped translating in my head. At first, my brain always tried to translate everything. I heard a sentence in English and changed into Portuguese in my head. Then I thought of an answer in Portuguese and translated it back into English. This took forever. Conversations were slow and I always felt behind. But after 4 months of speaking, listening, and thinking in English every single day, something incredible happened. One day, I was at a grocery store. The cashier looked at me and asked, "Do you need a bag?" And without thinking, I replied, "No, I have one." "Thanks." No translation. No hesitation. The words just came out. That was the moment I knew. I was finally thinking in English. For the first time, my brain didn't translate. The words came out naturally. I realized I was finally thinking in English. It felt like magic. If you're struggling with English, I have some advice. Speak every day, even if you're alone. Use the headphone trick like I did. Stop translating in your head and start thinking in English. Talk to native speakers, even if it's scary. Surround yourself with English. Change your phone, movies, and music to English. And most importantly, don't be afraid of mistakes. Mistakes help you grow. Never give up. I still remember the moment everything changed for me. The day I realized, wow, I can actually speak English. But before I tell you that story, let me take you deeper into my life in Canada. The struggles, the weirdest things, and how I finally started speaking English like a native. I had been in Canada for 6 months, and my English was improving. I could understand people better. I could order food without feeling scared. I could even talk to my classmates. But I still had one big problem. I was terrified of talking to native speakers. They spoke too fast, used too much slang, and I always felt stupid when I didn't understand something. If someone started a conversation with me, I would just smile, nod, and say, yes, or, haha, yeah, even if I had no idea what they said. I avoided conversations because I didn't want to embarrass myself. But deep down, I knew that if I wanted to be fluent, I had to face this fear. So I made a crazy decision. One morning, I walked into my favorite coffee shop and told myself, Sophia, today you are going to have a real conversation with a native speaker. No running away. I stood in line, nervous. My hands were sweaty. My heart was pounding. Then, a girl next to me smiled and said, Ugh, this line is so long, right? I froze. This was it, my moment. I had two choices, smile awkwardly and say nothing or try to respond. I took a deep breath and said, Yeah, it's really long. She laughed and said, I come here every morning and it's always like this. My brain started panicking. What do I say? What if I sound weird? But instead of overthinking, I just said, Oh, really? I just moved here, so I don't know. She smiled. Oh, cool. Where are you from? And just like that, we had a conversation. A real conversation. For the first time, I wasn't translating in my head. I wasn't scared. I just talked. After that day, something clicked in my brain. I realized I could actually do this. I didn't need to be perfect. I just needed confidence. And confidence was the missing key. Now that I was finally confident, I wanted to take my English to the next level. I didn't want to just speak English. I wanted to sound like a native speaker. So I started doing something crazy. I discovered a technique called the shadowing method. Every time I watched a TV show, I paused the video, repeated the sentence exactly like the actor, and tried to match their accent. For example, if the actor said, "Oh my God, that's insane," I would pause and say it exactly the same way. "Oh my God, that's insane." I copied their tone, speed, and emotion. I did this for hours every day. At first, it felt weird, almost unnatural, like I was just copying sounds without really understanding them. But I kept going. Every day, I repeated sentences, mimicked accents, and slowly, something changed. After 1 month, my pronunciation improved so much that even my teacher noticed. I also started keeping a notebook of my English mistakes. Every time I made an error, I wrote it down and corrected it. For example, one day I said, "I am agree with you." But the correct sentence was, "I agree with you." By reviewing my mistakes every day, I slowly stopped repeating them. But I knew that if I really wanted to improve, I needed to do something even harder. I had to force myself to make Canadian friends. It was scary, but I knew it was the fastest way to learn. So I pushed myself out of my comfort zone. I joined local events, went to free meetups for international students, and even used conversation exchange apps. I found Canadians who wanted to learn my language, so we did a language exchange. Half the time we spoke in English, half the time in Portuguese. I also stopped being shy at work and started talking to my coworkers more. At first, it was just small talk. "How was your weekend?" Or, "What are you doing after work?" But over time, I became more comfortable, and my English started to sound more natural. Even though my English was improving, life was still hard. I was always exhausted. Studying English, working part-time, cooking my own food. It was all too much. I missed my family. I wanted to visit home, but flights were too expensive. Money was a constant struggle. Even after 6 months, I still felt broke all the time. One day, I checked my bank account and saw I had only $5 left. $5. That was it. I sat in my tiny room and cried. Why is this so hard? I thought. Am I making a mistake? Should I just go back home? For a moment, I really considered it. Maybe I wasn't strong enough for this. Maybe I should just give up. But then, I remembered why I was here. I didn't come all this way just to quit. I wiped my tears, took a deep breath, and told myself, "No, I will make this work." And I did. I want you to imagine something. Imagine waking up in a beautiful apartment, looking at the city skyline, drinking your morning coffee and thinking, "I made it. I did it." I became the person I always dreamed of being. That's my life now. But 5 years ago, I was just a broke student, struggling with English, feeling lost in a foreign country. To get into medical school, I had to pass the IELTS exam. And let me tell you, it was terrifying. The reading section was full of long, complicated passages that made my head hurt. The speaking section felt like I was being judged every second. And the writing section? A complete nightmare. I studied every single day. I practiced writing essays, recorded myself speaking, and forced myself to read complicated medical articles in English. I didn't have the luxury of giving up. On the day of the exam, I walked into the room shaking. My hands were cold. My heart was racing. But then I reminded myself, Sophia, you didn't come this far to fail. You know this. You worked for this. So I took a deep breath, sat down, and did my best. A week later, I got my results. My hands were shaking as I opened the envelope. I read the paper once, then twice, then 3 times. I passed. Tears filled my eyes. I did it. I actually did it. At that moment, I knew nothing could stop me now. With my IELTS score, I finally got accepted into one of the best medical universities in Canada. It felt like I had reached the top of the mountain. But I was wrong. The real challenge was just beginning. Medical textbooks were written in advanced English. Professors spoke in complex medical terms that made my head spin. I had to write perfect reports, give professional presentations, and explain medical concepts clearly. It was 10 times harder than anything I had faced before. But then, I reminded myself of something important. If I could learn English, I could do anything. So I didn't quit. I recorded my lectures and listened to them every night, even while cooking or walking to class. I made flashcards for difficult medical terms and repeated them until they became natural. I joined study groups and forced myself to explain medical concepts in English every single day. It wasn't easy. There were nights I cried from exhaustion, days when I doubted myself. But I kept pushing, and after years of hard work, I finally graduated. Dr. Sophia Williams. I walked across that stage, took my diploma, and looked up at the sky. This is for you, Mom and Dad. I made it. After graduation, I got my first job at a big hospital in Toronto. When I received my first paycheck, $88,000. I stared at my bank account in disbelief. I remembered the days when I had only $5 left, the nights I had to choose between buying food or paying rent. Now I could buy anything I wanted. But the money wasn't the best part. The best part was saving lives. One day, a little girl came into the hospital. She was sick, scared, and crying. I knelt beside her, took her small hand in mine, and smiled. "Don't worry, sweetheart. I'll take care of you." Her mother, with tears in her eyes, looked at me and whispered, "Thank you, doctor." At that moment, I felt something I had never felt before. I wasn't just an English learner anymore. I wasn't just a student struggling in a foreign country. I was a doctor, and I had earned it. Now listen to me carefully. I know many people say, accept yourself as you are, but I disagree. You should never accept being weak. You should never accept being average. Change yourself, not for society, not for your friends, not for your family. Change yourself for you. Because let me tell you something, nobody is coming to save you. Not your parents, not your teachers, not your boyfriend or girlfriend. Only you can change your life. When I was struggling, I could have made excuses. I could have said, English is too hard, or I don't have enough money, or I'm not smart enough. But I didn't. Instead, I looked in the mirror and said, Sophia, stop making excuses. It's time to work. And that's exactly what I did. If you're still here, it means you want more from life. So let me tell you the truth, the real truth. Learn English like your life depends on it. Because in many ways, it does. If you want a great career, you need English. If you want to travel the world, you need English. If you want bigger opportunities, more freedom, more choices, you need English. So stop waiting for the perfect moment. Get up, open a book, watch English videos, practice every single day. Put yourself in uncomfortable situations. Talk to strangers, make mistakes, embarrass yourself. That's how you grow. That's how you improve. Today, I wake up every morning in my beautiful apartment in downtown Toronto. I drive my dream car. I travel to different countries. I help my parents financially. And most importantly, I love my life. But I wasn't born lucky. I didn't wake up one day and suddenly have everything I wanted. I created this life. And you can too. Right now, you have two choices. One, You can close this video, do nothing, and stay the same. Keep making excuses. Keep dreaming, but never act. Or 2, you can start working on yourself today. Learn English every day. Improve yourself. Take control of your life. The choice is yours. If you choose the second option, then subscribe to this channel, like this video, and let's start your journey together. Because trust me, when you become the best version of yourself, it feels like the whole world is in your hands. Now go, change your life.